16-year-old Jholie Moussa vanished after a mysterious phone call, but what seemed like a runaway case quickly turned into a nightmare. 2 weeks later, her body was found in a park, and the truth pointed to someone close to her. Today, we uncover the events leading to her tragic death and the justice that followed. If you're interested in more true crime stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for updates. Jholie Moussa was a 16-year-old girl living in Fairfax County, Virginia. She was known for being a bright, energetic teenager who had a close bond with her family, especially her twin sister Jane. Jholie and Jane were inseparable. They shared everything: clothes, interests, friends, and had a deep emotional connection. Their mother often described them as best friends who always looked out for one another. Despite their similarities, Jholie was seen as the more outgoing and adventurous of the two, while Jane was the quieter, more reserved sibling. Jholie's family spoke highly of her as a caring, responsible young woman who often helped out around the house and was protective of her family. She had dreams like any other teenager, with interests in fashion and socializing, but what made her stand out was her compassionate nature and willingness to help those she loved. Her close-knit relationship with Jane was particularly important to her, as they had been each other's support system throughout their young lives. However, Jholie's life took a different turn when she became involved with an older boy, who would later become her ex-boyfriend. The relationship had a significant impact on her life, as it became tumultuous over time. According to friends and family, the relationship was marked by control and manipulation. Jholie's ex-boyfriend, whose identity was not publicly disclosed during early investigations, exhibited aggressive and abusive behavior, which raised concerns among those close to her. Jholie confided in a few people about the stress she was experiencing, but like many teenagers, she kept much of her personal turmoil private, trying to handle things on her own. This relationship became a point of tension in Jholie's life, and it affected her emotionally. Friends noted that she had changed after her breakup, becoming more withdrawn and secretive. Despite these challenges, Jholie tried to maintain a normal teenage life, attending school and spending time with her sister and friends. Her family later expressed regret for not being more aware of the full extent of the relationship's impact on her mental health and well-being. In the months leading up to her disappearance, Jholie was active on social media, like many teens her age. She frequently posted on platforms like Instagram and Snapchat, sharing pictures and updates about her life. While social media served as a way for her to stay connected with friends, it also became a medium through which she communicated with people outside her immediate circle. In fact, it was suspected that social media played a role in the events leading up to her disappearance, as Jholie had been in contact with her ex-boyfriend and possibly others through these platforms. It's unclear whether any of these communications directly led to her decision to leave her home on the day she disappeared, but they certainly created an additional layer of complexity in her personal life. Jholie's family and friends were unaware of the full extent of her social media interactions and her relationship with her ex-boyfriend. In hindsight, they believe that these factors contributed to her decision to meet with someone that fateful day. Her disappearance, initially dismissed as a runaway case, would later reveal the darker side of her relationship and the unseen pressures Jholie had been facing. On January 12, 2018, 16-year-old Jholie Moussa was at home in Fairfax County, Virginia, with her twin sister Jane. It seemed like an ordinary day. However, in the early afternoon, Jholie received a phone call that would set off a chain of events leading to her disappearance. According to her family, the phone call seemed urgent, but Jholie didn't share many details. She told Jane she was going out for a bit and that she would be back later. That was the last time Jane would see her sister alive. Jholie left the house around 4:30 p.m. and headed to a nearby location in Fairfax County. She wasn't carrying much with her, and there was no indication that she was planning to be gone for long. Surveillance footage and witness statements suggested that Jholie had been seen heading toward a park where she often met friends, but her exact movements after leaving the house were unclear. Her phone's GPS pinged a few times over the next hour, but then all communication from her abruptly stopped. As the evening passed and Jholie failed to return home, her family began to worry. Jane was especially concerned since it wasn't like Jholie to disappear without a word. By late evening, their mother, who had been working, came home to find Jholie still missing. They attempted to reach her by phone and through social media, but there was no response. Jholie's family decided to report her missing to the police that same night. However, the family's efforts to get immediate help faced challenges. When Jholie's disappearance was first reported to Fairfax County authorities, she was classified as a runaway. This initial classification was critical as it caused delays in the investigation. The authorities assumed that Jholie had left voluntarily, likely to meet with friends or take some time away from home. It was not uncommon for teenagers to leave home for a few hours or even overnight, and police had no immediate reason to suspect foul play. This misclassification meant that the typical urgency attached to missing persons cases, especially involving minors, was not applied in Jholie's case. No Amber Alert was issued, and the investigation into her whereabouts did not begin in earnest for the first 48 hours. Her family, frustrated and increasingly fearful, took matters into their own hands. They began spreading the word about Jholie's disappearance, reaching out to her friends, posting on social media, and distributing flyers in their neighborhood. They were adamant that Jholie was not the type to run away and believed something had gone terribly wrong. During these crucial early hours, the family continued to push authorities to take the case more seriously. Despite their concerns, the police maintained their position that Jholie had likely run away, basing their judgment on the information available at the time, including her phone activity and her recent breakup with her ex-boyfriend. Jholie's mother and sister, however, knew something wasn't right. They insisted that Jholie wouldn't have simply left without keeping in touch, especially not with Jane, given how close the sisters were. After Jholie Moussa's disappearance on January 12, 2018, the first 48 hours passed with little to no formal investigation from law enforcement. Initially classified as a runaway, Jholie's case didn't receive the urgency typically applied to missing minors. This decision, made based on limited early information, reflected the police's belief that she had left voluntarily and would likely return on her own. During this critical window, no active search or significant police resources were dedicated to finding her. For Jholie's family, this delay was both frustrating and terrifying. They were adamant that something was wrong and that Jholie wasn't simply a runaway. Despite the lack of official action, Jholie's family, especially her twin sister Jane, immediately began their own efforts to find her. They made phone calls to friends, checked places Jholie frequented, and spread the word on social media. Flyers were printed and distributed across the community, and Jane, along with other family members, went door to door asking if anyone had seen or heard from Jholie. The family also continued to pressure the police, insisting that Jholie's disappearance was out of character and should not be treated as a typical runaway case. As the days went by without any word from Jholie, their concerns intensified. Her family was particularly troubled by the fact that Jholie's phone had stopped responding shortly after she left home on January 12th. This behavior was unlike her, especially given how close she was to her sister Jane. Jholie would normally have checked in with her family, or at the very least stayed in contact with her sister. Their deep bond made the silence even more alarming. Meanwhile, Jholie's mother and Jane continued to advocate for their case to be taken more seriously by law enforcement. They repeatedly called the Fairfax County Police, pleading for them to reclassify Jholie's disappearance as something more than a runaway case. However, due to the standard protocols for missing teenagers, the authorities held off on upgrading the case, waiting for further signs that foul play might be involved. The family felt the weight of time slipping away, knowing that the longer the case remained stagnant, the harder it would be to trace Jholie's whereabouts. During this period, the local community rallied around the family. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers joined the effort to find Jholie, organizing searches in local parks and neighborhoods. Social media became a crucial tool, with posts about her disappearance being shared widely. The family urged anyone who might have seen Jholie or had information to come forward. The community's response was overwhelming, and their efforts helped keep Jholie's case in the public eye even as official investigative efforts lagged behind. The turning point in the investigation finally came nearly 2 weeks after Jholie disappeared. On January 16, 2018, after continuous pressure from the family and growing public concern, law enforcement reclassified Jholie's case from that of a runaway to an endangered missing person. This decision marked a significant shift in the investigation. The change in classification reflected the authorities' recognition that something more sinister might be at play, and it allowed them to bring more resources to the case. With the reclassification, law enforcement began to treat the situation as a potential foul play case. Investigators revisited Jholie's last known movements, checking surveillance footage, reviewing phone records, and speaking with her friends and acquaintances. The authorities began to focus on the possibility that Jholie had been lured away or was in danger. Jholie's ex-boyfriend became a person of interest, given his history of abuse and his past relationship with Jholie. Investigators looked into whether he might have been involved or had knowledge of her whereabouts. Despite the escalated efforts, critical time had already been lost. As more days passed without any new leads, the family's worst fears seemed to be coming true. However, the shift in law enforcement's approach brought renewed attention to Jholie's case, leading to further public awareness and media coverage. The heightened profile of the case meant that more people were on alert, ready to report anything that might help in the search for Jholie. On January 26, 2018, 2 weeks after Jholie Moussa was last seen, her body was discovered in Woodlawn Park, a wooded area in Alexandria, Virginia, not far from her home. The park was a place Jholie was somewhat familiar with, but it was also an area that had been initially overlooked during the early stages of the search. Her body was found by law enforcement officers during a follow-up search, spurred by growing concern over her prolonged disappearance and the increasing likelihood that foul play was involved. Jholie's body was located in a secluded part of the park, partially hidden by leaves and brush. The state of the body indicated that efforts had been made to conceal her remains. She was covered with debris, suggesting that whoever had left her there had attempted to keep her from being found. Given the cold weather and the park's dense vegetation, it was clear that Jholie's body could have easily been missed if not for the more thorough search that had taken place. At the time of the discovery, authorities quickly secured the area and began collecting evidence. The location of Jholie's body raised several red flags. Woodlawn Park, though public, was somewhat isolated, making it an ideal location for someone to hide a body without drawing attention. Investigators began retracing the events that could have led Jholie to that specific location, considering whether she had been brought there against her will or if she had known her attacker. The state of Jholie's body provided further clues. While the exact details of her injuries were not immediately released to the public, the condition of the body suggested that she had been killed elsewhere and later transported to the park. This theory was supported by the fact that no signs of a struggle were found at the site. The concealment of the body also pointed to someone familiar with the area or who had carefully planned the disposal. The Fairfax County Medical Examiner's Office conducted a thorough autopsy on Jholie's remains to determine the cause of death. After completing the examination, the medical examiner ruled that Jholie had died of asphyxiation. This finding indicated that she had been suffocated, likely at the hands of someone who had been in close physical proximity to her. The autopsy also revealed that Jholie's death had likely occurred soon after her disappearance, possibly on the same day she went missing. These findings were consistent with the growing suspicion that Jholie had been the victim of a deliberate violent act and that her killer had intended to keep her death hidden. The discovery of Jholie's body marked a tragic end to the search, but provided the authorities with crucial physical evidence to further their investigation. Her death was now officially classified as a homicide, and the focus shifted entirely to identifying and apprehending the person responsible. While the discovery of her body brought devastating news to her family, it also gave them some closure and allowed law enforcement to continue their efforts with renewed intensity. The park, now a crime scene, became a focal point for the investigation as detectives worked to understand how Jholie's body ended up there. Investigators scoured the area for additional evidence, looking for any traces of the killer, whether through footprints, tire marks, or other physical clues. They also worked closely with Jholie's family and friends to gather more information about her last known interactions, hoping to piece together the circumstances of her final moments. With the cause of death established, the focus now was on finding justice for Jholie Moussa. Jholie Moussa's ex-boyfriend quickly became a prime suspect in her disappearance and eventual murder. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, those close to Jholie had noticed troubling signs in her relationship with him. He was older than Jholie and had a reputation for controlling, possessive, and abusive behavior. Friends and family members later described instances where Jholie appeared stressed and withdrawn because of the relationship. She had confided in a few people about his abusive tendencies, but like many young people in similar situations, she didn't openly share the full extent of what she was going through. The ex-boyfriend's history of abusive behavior raised red flags early in the investigation. Although their relationship had ended, he continued to keep tabs on Jholie, trying to maintain control over her life. In the days before her disappearance, Jholie had reportedly been in contact with him, both through social media and direct messages. It was these digital communications that would later play a key role in implicating him. As the investigation progressed, law enforcement began to piece together evidence that pointed directly to the ex-boyfriend. One of the critical pieces of evidence was a series of text messages exchanged between Jholie and her ex in the hours leading up to her disappearance. These messages suggested that he had been pressuring her to meet with him, despite the fact that their relationship had ended. Witnesses also came forward claiming that they had seen Jholie in the company of her ex-boyfriend on the day she disappeared, further tying him to her last known whereabouts. In addition to the digital communications, there were also reports of troubling behavior from the ex-boyfriend in the months prior to Jholie's death. Friends of Jholie recounted that he had threatened her multiple times and had exhibited jealous and aggressive tendencies when he felt she wasn't giving him enough attention. These accounts, combined with the messages and witness statements, painted a clear picture of a relationship marked by manipulation and control. Physical evidence also began to emerge as investigators continued to build their case. While no direct forensic evidence tying the ex-boyfriend to the crime scene was initially found, the combination of his abusive history, digital traces, and witness testimony made him the primary suspect. Authorities worked diligently to gather more concrete evidence, but the circumstantial case against him was already growing stronger by the day. On February 13, 2018, just a few weeks after Jholie's body was discovered, the ex-boyfriend was arrested and charged with her murder. The arrest came after law enforcement had gathered enough evidence to believe that he was responsible for Jholie's death. The charges included first-degree murder, as it was clear from the investigation that the crime had been premeditated. During his arrest and throughout the subsequent investigation, the ex-boyfriend's behavior was cold and largely uncooperative. He denied any involvement in Jholie's disappearance and murder, attempting to distance himself from the events. However, his attempts to deflect suspicion were undermined by the weight of the evidence against him. Investigators had built a solid case, relying heavily on the digital footprint he left behind, the testimonies of witnesses, and his known history of abusive behavior toward Jholie. As the investigation continued, more details about his past behavior came to light. It was revealed that he had a pattern of aggressive and controlling actions in previous relationships as well, further reinforcing the idea that he had been a dangerous influence in Jholie's life. Law enforcement also discovered that he had been monitoring Jholie's social media activity even after their breakup, trying to keep track of her movements and interactions with others. The ex-boyfriend's arrest was a significant moment in the case, as it brought some relief to Jholie's grieving family and the community. His behavior during the investigation and trial, marked by denials and an unwillingness to take responsibility, further demonstrated his callousness and lack of remorse. As the case moved forward, the charges against him would stand, with authorities continuing to work towards securing a conviction. Ultimately, the ex-boyfriend's arrest marked a critical step in bringing justice to Jholie Moussa's family. The evidence against him, while circumstantial in some areas, was overwhelming when considered as a whole. His pattern of abusive behavior, his interactions with Jholie prior to her death, and the mounting digital evidence all pointed to his role in her tragic death. Following the arrest of Jholie Moussa's ex-boyfriend, the legal proceedings moved forward with a focus on building a strong case for first-degree murder. The trial itself centered around proving that the ex-boyfriend had not only killed Jholie, but that the murder was premeditated. Prosecutors worked to piece together the timeline of events, the nature of the relationship, and the evidence that pointed to his direct involvement in Jholie's death. The prosecution's primary argument was that the ex-boyfriend had intentionally lured Jholie to meet him on the day of her disappearance. They presented text messages and other digital communications between the two, showing how he had pressured her into meeting with him despite the volatile nature of their relationship. These messages, along with witness statements from friends and family, painted a picture of a controlling and abusive individual who could not handle rejection. The prosecution argued that he had planned the murder, using the meeting as a pretext to carry out his violent intentions. Prosecutors also focused on the physical evidence found at the scene, as well as the circumstances under which Jholie's body was discovered. The fact that she had been asphyxiated and her body carefully concealed in Woodlawn Park indicated a deliberate attempt to cover up the crime. They contended that this act was consistent with premeditation rather than a crime of passion or a spur-of-the-moment incident. The prosecution also pointed to the ex-boyfriend's history of abusive behavior, using it as further evidence that Jholie's murder had been planned and carried out by someone who had a clear motive. In response, the defense attempted to cast doubt on the premeditation aspect of the crime. They argued that while the ex-boyfriend had been in contact with Jholie, there was no definitive proof that he had planned her murder in advance. The defense suggested that the events of that day could have spiraled out of control in a moment of anger, resulting in an unintentional death. They sought to have the charges reduced by focusing on the lack of direct forensic evidence linking the ex-boyfriend to the actual murder. The defense also tried to highlight the complexity of their relationship, implying that the meeting could have been consensual and that there was no clear evidence proving that he intended to kill her when they met. However, the weight of the evidence against the ex-boyfriend was overwhelming. The digital communications, witness testimony, and his history of violence toward Jholie played a key role in convincing the jury of his guilt. Prosecutors successfully demonstrated that his behavior was part of a larger pattern of abuse, control, and manipulation, which culminated in the premeditated murder of Jholie Moussa. The concealment of her body and the efforts to erase any trace of his involvement further reinforced the argument that he had planned the crime well in advance. The trial lasted several days, with both sides presenting their cases in detail. However, it became increasingly clear that the prosecution had the stronger argument, backed by compelling evidence. The jury deliberated and, after careful consideration, returned a verdict of guilty on the charge of first-degree murder. The conviction was a significant moment for Jholie's family, who had fought tirelessly for justice throughout the investigation and trial. Following the conviction, the ex-boyfriend was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The severity of the sentence reflected the court's recognition of the brutal nature of the crime, the premeditation involved, and the lasting impact on Jholie's family. The sentencing brought some measure of closure to the Moussa family, though the loss of Jholie was an irreplaceable tragedy. If you found this story informative and want to hear more true crime cases like this, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any future updates. Your support helps us keep bringing you these important stories. Thanks for watching.